When I scheduled gallbladder surgery. During peak beach week, my coworker made a PowerPoint presentation with security footage to prove I was faking it for vacation. What's your drastic times call for drastic measures story? My coworker tried to get me fired because I told her I was having surgery on the week she wanted for vacation. When I first told her I couldn't swap because my gallbladder surgery had already been scheduled, Elaine's face scrunched up. Awfully convenient for your surgery to fall during the best weather week of the summer. I tried showing her my pre-op appointment card, but she claimed Photoshop. She said, nobody schedules real surgery during perfect beach weather. Like that was a legitimate medical principle. I thought she was joking until I saw her marking something in a little notebook. Elaine started her investigation the next day by casually asking other people if they thought it was weird that I was having surgery during the most requested vacation week of the year. She created a shared document called Suspicious Medical Leave Patterns and started tracking every time I didn't look like I was in excruciating pain. When I brought in donuts for the office, she told everyone that someone about to have major surgery wouldn't be carrying a box that heavy. When she saw me laughing at someone's joke, she wrote in the document that I seemed too jovial for someone facing surgical intervention. I wanted to scream that gallbladder pain doesn't mean I can't experience human emotions, but I knew defending myself would just become more evidence in her deranged investigation. She started analyzing my daily behavior for signs of deception. She noted that I was still drinking coffee, which she claimed no real pre-surgery patient would do, even though my surgeon said it was fine until the day before. She took photos of me walking from my car and created a PowerPoint slide about how my alleged gallstones should make that stride length impossible. She found my dinner Venmo payment to my friend with a note, "Thanks for Thai food," and sent an email to HR saying no legitimate surgeon would allow a patient to eat spicy food before surgery. Elaine started telling everyone in the office that I was part of a growing trend of millennials faking medical procedures to get vacation time. She printed out articles about medical fraud and left them on my desk with certain passages highlighted. She made comments in meetings about how some people abuse the system, while honest people like her had to miss important family events. When I mentioned I was nervous about the anesthesia, she actually laughed and said, "Wow, you're really committed to this act." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because I was about to cry because she'd turned into office drama. She began documenting everything I did as evidence of my supposed deception. She tracked which parking spots I used, claiming I was establishing a fake pattern of mobility issues. She analyzed my lunch choices, saying someone facing major surgery would be eating healthier. She even calculated the statistical probability of someone my age needing gallbladder removal, and concluded it was basically impossible. When I came in walking slowly one morning because my abdomen was actually killing me, she told people I was overacting and that real pain doesn't conveniently appear only at work. Finally, she called a department meeting and presented a PowerPoint about medical vacation fraud. She had charts showing the correlation between good weather and suspicious medical leave, screenshots of my Venmo transactions, and security footage of me walking with measurements of my gait pattern. She'd created a timeline called Evidence of Deception that supposedly proved I'd only started mentioning abdominal pain after the vacation calendar was posted. During her presentation, Elaine showed slides analyzing everything from my coffee consumption to my facial expressions in meetings. She had a section called Red Flags that included the fact that I'd brought lunch instead of eating out like someone who was living their last weeks of freedom before surgery. She'd mapped out my parking choices to show I'd been faking mobility issues. She even had a pie chart of different types of elective surgeries people fake and where mine supposedly fit the pattern. My coworkers' faces ranged from confused to uncomfortable, though some were actually nodding along with Elaine's conspiracy theory. Our boss kept rubbing his temples while Elaine clicked through slide after slide of her evidence. She'd spent what must have been dozens of hours on this presentation. She stood there with her arms crossed, smirking like she'd just exposed the scandal of the century. My hands were shaking with rage, and the realization I was about to have to prove my gallbladder was actually failing to keep my job. I looked around the room at everyone staring at me, waiting for me to defend myself. Elaine was practically glowing with satisfaction. I stood up from my chair and said, "You know what, Elaine? You want proof?" My hand went straight to my pocket and I pulled out my phone, fingers already moving to open the medical app. I got halfway through typing my password before I stopped. Everyone in the room was staring at me, waiting, and something about their faces made me freeze. These people didn't deserve to see my private medical stuff. I slid the phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. "I'll be happy to provide proper documentation through the appropriate HR channels." My voice came out way calmer than I felt inside. I turned to look at our boss, who was still rubbing his temples. "Can we please handle this through proper procedures instead of whatever this is?" My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. Elaine started making this noise like she was about to argue. "I have every right to present my concerns about fraud in this workplace." Our boss's head snapped up and he looked at Elaine with this expression I'd never seen before. "Stop, just stop." He stood up from his chair so fast it rolled backward. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. Now." People started getting up and filing out of the conference room, most of them looking at the floor or the walls, anywhere but at me or Elaine. Some of them gave me these quick little glances that I couldn't read. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop and started typing an email to HR. My fingers were moving so fast I had to keep going back to fix typos. I wrote down everything that had just happened in the meeting, every single detail I could remember. Then I went back through my computer and found all the screenshots I'd been taking of Elaine's shared document over the past few weeks. I'd been saving them just in case, and now I was glad I did. I attached 15 different screenshots showing her tracking my coffee habits and parking spots, and attached them to the email. My anger was actually helping me write clearly without getting all emotional about it. I just stuck to the facts. 2 hours later, my email pinged with a response from Alessandra in HR. She said she was acknowledging my complaint and wanted to schedule separate meetings with me and Elaine. Her email mentioned that creating hostile work environments through medical harassment was taken very seriously by the company. Reading that line made me feel the first bit of hope I'd felt since this whole mess started. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through every single thing Elaine had created about me. I downloaded her entire shared document, all 30 pages of her observations about when I drank coffee and which parking spots I used. I saved every email she'd sent about my supposed fraud. I backed up everything to my personal cloud storage, making sure I had copies of copies. Oliver stopped by my desk right before 5 o'clock. He leaned against the cubicle wall and kept his voice low. I'm willing to provide a statement about what I've witnessed. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. I've been uncomfortable with what she's been doing for weeks, but didn't know what to do about it. Having someone else on my side made me feel less alone in this whole crazy situation. That evening, I was at home on my laptop when a notification popped up from our team Slack. Elaine had posted this message about integrity in the workplace and how some people take advantage of others' trust. I took a screenshot immediately but didn't type anything back. My fingers were literally itching to respond, but I closed the laptop instead. I wasn't going to give her any more ammunition. Around midnight, I woke up with this stabbing pain in my abdomen that was way worse than before. I drove myself to urgent care, bent over the steering wheel the whole way. The doctor there gave me stronger pain medication and said stress was probably making my symptoms worse. I made sure to get detailed visit notes and asked for extra copies of everything for my documentation. The next morning, I met with Alessandra in her office to start the formal FMLA paperwork. She explained that I didn't have to tell anyone except HR about my specific medical condition as long as I had proper documentation from my doctor. We went through all the forms together and scheduled my leave to begin in 2 weeks exactly as I'd originally planned. She kept reassuring me that everything would be handled properly and that I had nothing to worry about. Lunch couldn't come fast enough after that meeting. I grabbed my phone and headed to my car to call my best friend while eating my sandwich. She picked up on the second ring and I told her everything about Elaine's crazy presentation. She started laughing when I described the coffee consumption charts and the parking spot analysis. We both cracked up about how Elaine had actually measured my walking stride from security footage. Even though the whole thing still hurt, hearing someone else see how ridiculous it was made me feel less alone. After hanging up, I felt way more centered and ready to face the afternoon. My boss caught me right when I got back to my desk and asked me to step into his office. Something's off about Elaine turning into a full-time detective over a vacation week. Who has time to create PowerPoint presentations tracking someone's coffee habits? The fact she measured walking strides from security footage makes me wonder what her actual job responsibilities are supposed to be. He started talking about coverage for my upcoming absence, being super careful not to mention yesterday's meeting directly. He kept asking if I was absolutely sure I needed that specific week off and whether maybe I could reschedule for a less busy time. His questions made it obvious he was doubting whether I really needed surgery. My frustration started building again as he talked about project deadlines and client meetings. I finally told him that any concerns about my medical leave should go through HR since they had all my documentation. His face got a little red, but he nodded and let me leave his office. About an hour later, everyone's email pinged with a message from Alessandra. The subject line just said, Office Communication Guidelines, but we all knew what it was about. She wrote that all staff needed to immediately stop any public commentary about coworkers' medical situations or personal matters. The email didn't name anyone specifically, but it was crystal clear what had triggered it. I watched Elaine's face turn bright red as she read it at her desk across from me. She slammed her laptop shut a little too hard and stormed off to the break room. That evening at home, I decided to create my own timeline to protect myself. I went through my emails from the past few months and found the first time I'd mentioned stomach problems to my manager. It was 2 whole months before the vacation calendar had even been posted. I found 3 different emails where I'd mentioned missing lunch because I felt too sick to eat. One email even mentioned having to leave a client meeting early because of nausea. I organized everything into a clear timeline document with dates and screenshots. Having actual facts on my side felt really empowering after all of Elaine's made-up evidence. The next morning, Oliver stopped by my desk with his laptop. He showed me screenshots of Slack messages that Elaine had been sending to different coworkers. She'd been trying to get people to watch me and report any suspicious behavior. Most people had either not responded or sent back really uncomfortable replies. One person had even told her to stop and focus on her own work. Oliver had saved everything showing this pattern of harassment that went way beyond just her presentation. He emailed me all the screenshots so I'd have copies for my records. Later that day, Rajesh from IT came to find me during a break. He'd been asked by HR to look into some technical stuff related to my situation. He showed me metadata from Elaine's shared document about my supposed fake surgery. The data showed she'd been updating it multiple times every single day for 3 weeks straight. Sometimes she was adding to it at like 2 a.m., which seemed completely obsessed. He also confirmed that she'd taken screenshots of my Venmo transactions using her work computer during office hours. All this technical evidence made everything feel way more official and serious than just office gossip. Rajesh said he'd already sent everything to Alessandra for the investigation. I found out later from Oliver that during Elaine's HR meeting with Alessandra, the truth about her motivation finally came out. Apparently, Elaine desperately wanted that exact week off for her sister's destination wedding in Hawaii. She'd already bought her plane tickets before checking the vacation calendar and couldn't get a refund. While this explained why she'd gone so crazy about my surgery timing, it definitely didn't excuse her behavior. I felt a tiny bit of sympathy mixed with my anger, but mostly I was just mad that she'd put me through all this for a wedding. The next day, my boss started redistributing my upcoming projects to other team members. This triggered a whole new round of whispers about whether I was really having surgery or secretly planning a beach vacation. I could see the doubt in people's faces when they looked at me. Some coworkers who'd been friendly before were now avoiding eye contact. It stung way more than I expected to have people questioning my honesty. I kept my head down and focused on wrapping up my current tasks before my leave. Then Elaine escalated things even more by filing her own complaint with HR. She claimed I was harassing her by collecting evidence of her public statements about me. Alessandra called me to explain that this was a really common defense defensive tactic that people use when they're being investigated. She said it wouldn't affect anything and that I should just keep documenting everything like I had been. I was annoyed but trusted that the process would work itself out. That evening, I had a phone consultation with Christina Haddad, an employment lawyer my friend had recommended. I emailed her all my documentation before our call, and she reviewed everything while we talked. She confirmed I was handling everything correctly and gave me specific language to use in any future communications about the situation. She also explained my rights and what to expect from the investigation process. Having legal backup made me feel way more confident about everything. The next morning, I called my surgeon's office and asked if they could write something official about my surgery date. The receptionist put me on hold for 10 minutes before transferring me to the surgical coordinator. She said Dr. Mansour could write a letter confirming everything was scheduled based on his availability and medical need. I drove over during lunch to pick it up since I wanted the original on letterhead. The letter stated my surgery date was the first available slot after my diagnosis, and that waiting longer could mean emergency surgery. It specifically mentioned that patients don't choose surgery dates, and that medical scheduling depends on operating room availability. I made 3 copies and kept the original in my car just in case. When I got back to the office, I went straight to HR to give Alessandra a copy. She looked relieved when she saw it and told me this was more than enough for my FMLA paperwork. She reminded me that nobody else needed to see my medical details since everything was protected by privacy laws. She said she'd already started the investigation into Elaine's behavior, and that I should focus on my health. Walking to the break room for lunch the next day felt like walking through a minefield. Several coworkers who usually sat at my table suddenly had somewhere else to be when I walked in. 2 people from accounting actually got up and moved to another table when I sat down. The room got quiet in that obvious way where everyone's trying not to look at you. I heated up my leftover pasta and tried to act normal even though my hands were shaking. Oliver came in a few minutes later and sat right next to me like nothing was weird. He started talking about a new project deadline and asked my opinion on the timeline. Other people slowly started talking again, but I could feel them watching me. That afternoon, my computer pinged with a company-wide email from the compliance team. The subject line was, Reminder, Medical Privacy and Professional Conduct Standards, and it outlined that employees cannot investigate or question coworkers' medical situations. It listed potential disciplinary actions, including termination for violating these policies. The email didn't name anyone, but everyone knew why it was sent. I watched Elaine read it at her desk, and her face turned red. She spent the rest of the day typing so hard I could hear her keyboard from across the room. The next morning's stand-up meeting was tense before it even started. Elaine kept looking at me and then at our boss like she was waiting for something. When we got to project updates, she said something about how some people's convenient timing was affecting team deliverables. I looked straight at our boss and said medical topics shouldn't be part of work discussions. He cleared his throat and quickly moved to the next agenda item. Elaine's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might crack a tooth. 2 days later, the pain hit me like a truck right after lunch. I'd been trying to ignore the growing ache all morning, but suddenly I couldn't sit up straight. My vision got blurry, and I had to grip my desk to keep from doubling over. Oliver noticed me struggling and came over immediately. He helped me pack my things and walked me to my car without making a big scene. I found out later that several people saw me barely able to walk and started questioning Elaine's whole fraud theory. I hated that my pain became public evidence, but at least some people were starting to see the truth. The next week, Alessandra called me into her office to tell me risk management was now involved. She explained that Elaine's public accusations about medical fraud had created potential legal liability for the company. They were taking it extremely seriously now that lawyers were reviewing everything. The situation had gone from the office drama to a real corporate issue with serious consequences. She said they'd be interviewing everyone who attended Elaine's presentation. When I checked my pay stub that Friday, I noticed they'd coded my recent sick day as vacation time. I had to submit a ticket to payroll to get it fixed, explaining it was medical leave, not personal time. The payroll person apologized and said there'd been some confusion about my time off coding. It felt like one more thing making me prove I was really sick. The whole process took 3 emails and 2 phone calls to resolve. Following Christina's advice from our call, I wrote Elaine a formal email requesting she stop all commentary about my medical situation. I kept it professional but clear, copying HR and my boss like Christina suggested. The email was only 3 sentences saying her behavior was inappropriate and needed to stop immediately. Elaine didn't reply, but I saw her showing her phone to people in the break room later. She was pointing at the screen and shaking her head like I was the unreasonable one. Why does Elaine keep digging herself deeper into this mess when HR and compliance are clearly watching her every move? Her sister's wedding explains the desperation, but doubling down with counter complaints while the company's bringing in lawyers seems like career suicide to me. A coworker pulled me aside the next day and told me Elaine had asked her to look in my desk drawer for medications. The coworker said she refused immediately and reported it to Alessandra right away. She said Elaine had claimed she just wanted to help prove I was really sick. I thanked her for telling me and for standing up to Elaine's crazy investigation. At least some people were starting to see how far over the line Elaine had gone. Alessandra called me into her office 2 hours later with a stack of papers and a look on her face that meant business. She had Elaine's shared document printed out with yellow highlights all over it and sticky notes marking the worst parts. She told me she'd already issued Elaine a formal written warning for creating a hostile work environment and ordered the document deleted immediately. I watched through the glass wall as Alessandra walked to Elaine's desk and handed her the warning letter. Elaine's face went red as she read it, but she clicked around on her computer and the shared document disappeared. She kept saying something about protecting the company's interests, but Alessandra just pointed at the letter again. I felt good seeing Elaine finally face consequences, but I knew she wasn't going to let this go. The day before my surgery, I decided to make my own document for the team about who would cover what while I was out. I titled different sections, Evidence of Preparation and Red Flags of Responsibility, with bullet points about each project. Oliver burst out laughing when he saw it and said it was perfect. Even my boss boss cracked a small smile when I showed him the coverage plan with its fake investigation format. The morning of surgery came fast, and my mom drove me to the hospital at 5 in the morning. They got me into a gown and started the IV, and before I knew it, they were wheeling me into the operating room. I woke up hours later feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach with a sledgehammer. The pain was way worse than I expected, and moving even an inch made me want to scream. They kept me overnight for observation, and I spent most of it pressing the pain medication button every time it would let me. My phone stayed off except for texting my family that I was okay, because I couldn't deal with anything else. The first few days at home were a blur of pain meds and sleeping and trying to find a position that didn't hurt. On day 4 of recovery, my friend texted me a screenshot from Facebook that made my blood boil even through the medication fog. Elaine had posted 3 different articles about millennials faking medical procedures to get time off work. She didn't use my name, but the timing was obvious to anyone who knew what was happening. I forwarded the screenshots to Christina, who replied within minutes saying this was perfect evidence for strengthening our harassment case. She said Elaine posting this during my actual recovery showed malicious intent and a pattern of behavior. Christina spent the next day drafting a measured letter to the company's legal counsel about the reputational harm from Elaine's continued harassment. She included the Facebook posts and explained how they could damage my professional standing even outside our company. She sent me a copy, and it was 3 pages of legal language about defamation and hostile work environment and liability. The company lawyers apparently took notice fast because Alessandra called me that afternoon to check how I was doing and mentioned that legal was now involved. She said they were scheduling a formal mediation for when I returned with strict ground rules about what could be discussed. She emphasized that my medical details would stay private and the focus would be on workplace behavior standards. I spent the rest of my recovery week writing down talking points for the mediation, even though sitting up to type hurt. Meanwhile, payroll finally fixed most of my sick leave coding, but when I checked my pay stub online, some overtime calculations were still wrong. After everything else, I decided to just let the small discrepancy go because I didn't have energy for another battle. Sometimes you have to pick which hills to die on, and $50 of overtime wasn't worth it. Oliver organized some of the team to send me get well cards, and 2 people texted me privately to apologize for initially believing Elaine's theory. One said she felt terrible for not speaking up sooner, and the other said Elaine had seemed so confident that he'd doubted himself. The gestures were small, but they meant a lot while I was stuck at home feeling like a pariah. Then Rajesh called me with news that made everything even worse. He'd been helping with an IT audit and discovered that Elaine had requested security footage access through facilities for her PowerPoint presentation. She'd actually filled out forms to get video of me walking through the parking lot and hallways. The invasion of privacy went way deeper than I'd realized, and Rajesh said he'd already reported it to Alessandra. He forwarded me the access request forms where Elaine had written she needed the footage for a workplace safety presentation. Even Alessandra seemed shocked when she called me about it and said this information was added to the HR file immediately. She explained that requesting security footage under false pretenses was a serious violation of company policy. She also sat me down over a video call to explain the reality of workplace discipline and how these things actually work. She said that while Elaine's behavior was clearly wrong, termination wasn't automatic for first offenses even with all this evidence. There were progressive discipline steps and burden of proof requirements and union considerations I hadn't thought about. I was disappointed, but I understood the legal constraints they were working under. The week before I went back to work, Christina came over every night after dinner to help me practice staying calm. She'd pretend to be Elaine making snide comments while I practiced keeping my face neutral and my voice steady. We went through different scenarios, like what if Elaine cornered me in the break room or started crying during the mediation. I practiced saying things like, I need to redirect this conversation to HR over and over until it felt natural. My hands would still shake when I thought about facing everyone again, but at least I had a plan. The night before my return, I barely slept and kept running through Christina's advice about documenting everything and never being alone with Elaine. My first day back, I walked into the conference room for the mediation and saw Elaine already sitting there with her arms crossed. My boss looked uncomfortable in his seat while Alessandra had a thick folder in front of her. The air felt heavy and nobody made eye contact when I sat down. Elaine immediately started talking about how she'd been victimized for trying to protect company resources. Alessandra cut her off and said we'd follow a structured agenda. I focused on my breathing and kept my hands folded on the table, even when Elaine rolled her eyes at everything I said. When Alessandra asked me to present my timeline, I pulled out my organized folder with every document in chronological order. I showed the surgeon's letter confirming my diagnosis from 2 months before the vacation calendar was even posted. I explained how the Venmo payment Elaine had screenshot was from 3 weeks before surgery when Thai food was still allowed. I pointed out that she'd taken photos of me without consent and created presentations about my medical condition during work hours. Elaine kept interrupting to say I was twisting things, but Alessandra kept redirecting her to wait her turn. When I showed the email where Elaine called my medical documents photoshopped, even my boss shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Alessandra took notes on everything and asked Elaine if she had any actual evidence of fraud beyond her personal observations. Elaine started talking about weather patterns and statistical probability, but Alessandra stopped her and asked for documentation. The meeting went on for 2 hours with Elaine getting more defensive each time Alessandra asked for proof. 3 days later, Alessandra called me into her office to discuss the final decision. Elaine would receive a formal warning that would stay in her file for 2 years. She was removed from any involvement in scheduling or leave approval. She had to complete a mandatory training on workplace respect and medical privacy within 30 days. It wasn't the firing I'd hoped for, but Alessandra explained that progressive discipline meant this was the first official step. If Elaine did anything similar again, termination would be automatic. The warning felt like a hollow victory, but at least there was official documentation that I'd been wronged. When I got back to my desk, reactions from coworkers were all over the place. Some people acted like nothing had happened, while others kept their distance assistants like drama was contagious. Oliver brought me coffee my first morning back and said he was glad I was okay. A few people whispered sorry about everything when we passed in the hallway, but most just avoided eye contact. I realized pretty quickly that the office would never feel the same, but at least I had a few people who supported me. The awkwardness became the new normal, and I focused on the work instead of trying to fix relationships that were probably permanently damaged. Our boss sent out an email the next week announcing a new policy about medical leave. All health-related discussions would go exclusively through HR with no peer involvement allowed. Anyone who needed to discuss scheduling conflicts should submit requests through the HR portal. He seemed relieved to have official rules to point to when people complained about vacation conflicts. The policy was obviously created because of my situation, but at least it would protect other people from their own Elaines. Elaine asking coworkers to search through someone's desk drawers for medications? That crosses so many lines I'm trying to count them all. What makes someone think they have the right to turn coworkers into their personal spy network? 3 weeks after I returned, I got called into another meeting with Alessandra. Elaine had filed a grievance with the union claiming she was retaliated against for raising concerns about fraud. She said the formal warning was unfair and that she'd been trying to protect the company. The investigation would require multiple statements from me and meetings that would eat into my work time. Alessandra warned me this could drag on for months, even though the claim had no merit. The process itself became another form of harassment that HR couldn't stop because union rules required full investigation. I spent hours writing statements and gathering more documentation while trying to keep up with my regular work. Every few weeks there'd be another meeting or request for clarification that pulled me away from my desk. My performance review came up 5 months after returning, and my boss sat me down with an uncomfortable expression. Despite meeting all my objectives and project deadlines, my rating dropped from exceeds expectations to meets expectations this year. He mentioned vague things like team disruption and communication challenges without directly saying it was about the medical leave situation. The lower rating meant my annual bonus would be several $1,000s less than I'd been counting on. I needed that money for the medical bills from my surgery, but there was no appeals process for performance ratings. I wanted to scream about the unfairness, but knew that would just prove his point about disruption. Around the same time, Elaine started working from home 3 days a week. The official reason was unrelated family obligations, but everyone knew it was really to avoid me. This arrangement made my work harder because she'd delay responding to project emails and miss virtual meetings. I couldn't complain without looking petty, so I just documented the delays and worked around her schedule. The dysfunction became normalized as just how our team operated now. People stopped questioning why simple approvals took days, or why Elaine was never in important meetings. 6 months after everything happened, I was checking LinkedIn when I noticed 2 coworkers who'd witnessed the whole mess had updated their profiles. They'd both used me as a reference for new jobs without telling me beforehand. When I messaged them privately, they admitted the toxic environment made them want to leave even though they'd supported me. One said watching management protect Elaine while punishing me for being harassed made them lose faith in the company. My situation had become a catalyst for broader team dissolution, but management refused to acknowledge the connection. They kept hiring replacements who'd leave within months once they figured out how dysfunctional things were. The real cost of keeping Elaine was losing good employees, but nobody in leadership wanted to admit they'd handled everything wrong. 2 weeks later, HR sent out an email about new medical leave documentation requirements. The policy now needed 3 different forms from your doctor, plus a notarized statement about why the procedure couldn't be rescheduled. People had to submit everything at least 60 days before any planned medical leave. My coworker who needed knee surgery had to push it back 4 months because she couldn't get all the paperwork done in time. Another guy's colonoscopy got denied because he didn't have the right form notarized. Everyone knew these changes happened because of my situation, but nobody would say it out loud. Elaine kept making comments about how some people ruined things for everyone else. She'd bring it up in casual conversation like she was talking about the weather. The whole office started treating medical leave like some impossible obstacle course. When vacation planning opened up 6 months later, I picked a week in October, even though my family reunion was in July. I couldn't risk another confrontation with Elaine about the summer weeks. She grabbed her usual July slot without anyone questioning it. My mom called asking why I wasn't coming to the reunion, and I made up some excuse about a big project. The message was clear around the office that causing enough trouble got you whatever you wanted. Meanwhile, my boss started leaving me off important emails. He assigned the new product launch to someone who'd been there half as long as me. When I asked about joining the strategy meetings, he said they were keeping them small this year. I watched younger coworkers get opportunities I'd been working toward for years. My annual review mentioned I needed to work on being a team player, which was code for the medical leave drama. I brought up the pattern of being excluded, and he looked me straight in the eye and said it had nothing to do with what happened with Elaine. We both knew he was lying, but what could I do about it? A year passed, and I heard through the office gossip that Elaine was moving to the finance department. The announcement email praised her attention to detail and commitment to compliance like those were positive traits instead of harassment tactics. Several coworkers came to my desk that day saying how disgusted they were that she basically got rewarded. One person said it made them sick that causing all that trouble led to a fresh start in a new department. That evening, I went home and updated my resume for the first time in 5 years. I started applying to jobs at other companies because sometimes walking away is the only way to actually win. 8 months later, I sat in the conference room for my exit interview with the same HR person who'd handled the original complaint. She asked why I was leaving, and I mentioned the hostile work environment that never got resolved. She typed some notes and said she understood my concerns, but since I was already leaving and Elaine worked in a different department, now there wasn't much they could do. I knew she'd file the notes away and nothing would change. Some other person would probably go through the same thing next year, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Thanks for tagging along with me today. Definitely felt like a real journey we went on together. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Subscribe for more content like this.